you very much. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to be talking to you about the operating system of payments. We're going to be talking about a couple of things before we get started. My name is Joe Nash. You can find me on Twitter at this handle. And I'm a developer advocate at a company called Braintree. Has anyone heard of Braintree? Okay, cool. Who's had a PayPal? Slightly better hands, awesome. So I'll tell you a little bit about us. This is mainly a talk about a couple of really cool technologies which are kind of taking the payments industry by storm. So I'll tell you a little bit about payments, a little bit about tokenization. We'll have a good time. So firstly, thank you for having me. This is awesome. Keynoting aside people like these wonderful people over here. Keynoting before Rasmus Lerdorf, that's insane. So this is really good fun. How many people are students here? I saw a lot of student badges. Awesome, that's really cool. I have a lot of time for students, so please come talk to me throughout the weekend. Saturday. So we're going to talk about tokenization. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what tokenization is, why it's important, and why it's more than just what you may have heard about it already. Has anyone heard of tokenization? Awesome. Okay. So you'll probably have a very set usage for that in mind. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how it helps with some other things you may have thought of. So to do that, I need to tell you a bit about the payments industry, and we need to talk a bit about payment methods. We're going to talk about the user experience of payment methods and why it's so bad and why we're seeing a lot of the trends we're currently seeing. So the payments industry, it's a really interesting space. The reason it's so interesting is mainly because it's growing so fast. If we look at the amount of payments processed through PayPal alone, they've gone up by 25% between now and last year. We're now up to 1.16 billion payments being processed through PayPal, which is an absolutely crazy number. To put that in some perspective, we're finding that 1 in 6 payments online is facilitated through PayPal, which is absolutely mind-boggling. 1 in 6 of the payments that goes online is going through PayPal. So it's a huge and crazy number of payments taking place in an industry that's growing very fast. And when we look at Braintree in isolation, we were acquired by PayPal about 2 years ago now. We find that with a relatively young company, we're processing 50 billion worth of payments this year. And in just 2 years, our Braintree, the amount of cards we've stored has gone up an insane amount. Just between this year and last year, we have 4 million cards on file, up to 118% on what we did last year. That's a lot of payments being processed and a lot of cards being stored with us. And especially when you look at the trends of where those payments are being made and where those payments are being used, finding some really interesting things. 27% of online transactions through our systems are going through mobile, which is really, really interesting. We're going to talk about why that's interesting soon, because there's some frightening stats around mobile websites and mobile apps, which would worry any developer. But before we do that, let's talk a bit about payment methods. So the thing about payment methods is that there's a wide amount of fragmentation, because fundamentally, we don't all pay the same way. And this is before we even start talking about the fancy payment methods. Obviously, I'm sure you're all aware of Apple Pay, Android Pay, Bitcoin. And these are all payment methods which have kind of emerged within the last couple of years. These are all really new things. But if we go back to basics and we go back to the payment methods we've been using for decades, say the major credit cards, even there we find a huge discrepancy. If we look at France, for example, we find that 57% of online transactions are going through Visa, MasterCard, or Amex. And when you look at Germany, it's only 9% going through Visa, MasterCard, and Amex. So even in a relatively old school payment method, one which you'd think would be relatively well embedded, just between those two very close countries, there is a huge difference. So when we start talking about things like Bitcoin, it gets very, very complicated. And when you start talking about digital wallets like Apple Pay, like PayPal, it gets even more complicated. I mean, the advantage of all these new payment methods and all this wide variety of things coming out is that it's great for user choice. But if you're a merchant who has to deal with accepting these, it can be a real headache. And if you're a developer, which I'm sure most of you are, it is like literally hell on earth having to build these things in. And this is fundamentally an issue of user experience. The reason there is such a wide space to be disrupted is because the payments industry is so rapidly growing, but the experience with payments is universally awful, right? If you're going for a mobile website and you hit a form and you've got like 6 million boxes on there with and you have to put all your credit card details in, no one has time for that. No one wants to do that. So that's why there is such a ripe space for disruption, for innovation, for these new methods to be coming out. So when we look at mobile apps and we look at where these places are taking payments, as I said earlier, 27% of payments through our systems alone are taking place through mobile. Time spent in mobile, we can see why time spent in mobile apps would be growing 21% year on year. But then the frightening thing about that is that most mobile apps are only opened once. People download your app, they open it, they never go back. And when we look at a study that BBC did, when we look at websites, you might think, oh no, it's okay, my mobile app isn't actually an app, it's a mobile optimized website. The story is no better there. The average user is only spending 60 seconds on your site. And that one time they open your app, they're spending 103 seconds in it, and then they're leaving. That 60 seconds, that 103 seconds, that's not enough time for them to have any meaningful engagement. That's not enough time for them to buy into your commerce experience. They're not going to be spending any money for your experience. But let's look at a contrast. Video games. So I'm sure a lot of you here will know that you don't spend just 60 seconds in a video game. And what makes video games so effective? What makes you physically lean when you're playing a racing game? What makes you jump up and down when you win or cry when you lose? What makes you do stupid things like this? This is actually my Steam profile. As you can see, I haven't yet bought Fallout 4, but it'll be bad when I do. So how are we getting such a huge discrepancy from 103 seconds to 134 hours? And this one was in 2 weeks, by the way. I'm somewhat proud. And the reason we get that discrepancy is because something called immersion. Immersion is what drives people to stay in our apps. So what drives them to open them more than once. So if we look at the definition of immersion, if you think it's immersing someone in water, you're very much in the wrong conference. We find that it's about deep mental involvement. When you immerse a user, you are building a world around them and convincing them that this is a beautiful experience. You're putting them in touch with that experience. You're creating a seamless environment for them to enjoy and for them to find what they're looking for. And developers need immersion. You need that magical feeling that drives people to come back to your apps. That immersion that you get through video games, through narrative immersion, is what makes people come back more than once. It's what makes people stay those ridiculous hours. So if we look at a contrast, if we look at a typical web commerce experience, let's go for a story of that. So I'm going to turn myself into a consumer. And as a consumer, I'm going to go on the web to buy a teapot. So we've already established that consumers don't hang around in your app for very long. So let's pretend I'm a typical consumer. So I do what most typical consumers are going to do. And being a consumer, I'm lazy. So I'm going to Google where to find my thing. So I Google for a teapot shop. And again, being a typical lazy consumer, I've only got 60 seconds to spend on this stuff. I go for the first one. So I find my teapot shop and I'm like, yeah, this looks like a great experience. This is a really pretty website. I'm excited to shop here and find my teapot. So I use the navigations along the top and I land in new arrivals. Again, being a lazy user, I'm just using what's given to me, putting no effort in whatsoever here. And I'm like, okay, cool, these look nice. I'm really excited to spend $50 on this lovely teapot, this beautiful. Yep, really excited to buy that. So I put that in my basket. So right now, I'm already unusual. I have made it this far. You have immersed me to this point, and I'm ready to pay $50 for this. Really ready for that. So it's in my basket, and I'm ready to click go, and I'm waiting there, and I'm like, oh, so excited for this teapot. And I click proceed to checkout. And oh my word, there are just boxes all over the place. And the fun thing is, this isn't all of the form fields. If I want to see all the form fields in one page, I have to zoom out by 70%. It is absolutely mind-bogglingly bad. At this point, all I wanted was for the website to shut up and take my money. What the website has done there is shattered my immersion. You see, immersion is really fragile. That seamless world, all it takes is for one tiny tear in the fabric of the world you've created, and the user is lost. You've killed the magic. And that is not something we want. So when we look at immersion and we look at e-commerce experiences, we're fundamentally faced with three problems. There's a huge variety of payment methods. Our users have a lot of payment methods and a lot of ways by which they want to pay. Yes, almost all users will have a card of some type. That's not their preferred method. And having to think about which method they can pay with, having to say, oh, they don't accept my payment method, that's enough of a gap in the seams to break their immersion. Then we're talking about user experience. As you've just seen, a lot of traditional e-commerce experiences are just awful. They just have huge problems, too many form fields, too many issues, too slow. Users don't have time for that. They've got 60 seconds. You've got 60 seconds of their time to convert them. And we talk about security. Obviously, when you're taking payment methods online or you're doing anything with user details, security is a huge concern. But I'm here to present you a solution to all three of those problems in one go. And that is, of course, tokenization. So, tokenization, let's go for the boring bit, is a PCI DSS recommended security method. So PCI DSS is the payment card industry data security standard, which is a standard set up by all the payment card industry big bods like Visa, like MasterCard, that decides how they should safely look after your data. Hugely important. It's recommended that you combine tokenization with end-to-end encryption, and that way people's payment card details should be relatively safe. So if we look at what tokenization actually does, we're finding that they take all the sensitive details, they take it all together, and they turn it into one long string of random letters and characters. It's meaningless to anyone who gets hold of it in your app, which is great. If your app is compromised, they're not going to find a credit card, they're going to find a token. Perfect. So if we simplify that a bit, what we're talking about is taking something you care about, like adorable puppies, and replacing it with something you don't care about. So when we look at how this is applied to the payment card industry, when you use Braintree as an example, the reason it makes you safer is because, if we use this lovely confusing diagram here, you take the payment card details in at your client, they're then encrypted and sent to Braintree. Braintree turns those into a token, it returns the token to you, and you use that token to authorize, to make payments, to push through sales throughout your app. The credit card details never touch your service or your server or your client. They're used, put in through a hosted field, they're sent straight to us, we tokenize them, and we send them back. Perfect. You are safe, your PCI DSS compliance burden is lowered because we're handling all the nasty stuff. So on the surface, tokenization is absolutely great. It's a perfect method of security. It's really, really handy for a lot of things. When we come out the other side, we find that it has deep-reaching implication for user experience. We find that it can remove horrible experiences like this. And the way it does that, the way it can be used to improve user experience, is through a handy little technique called vaulting. You see, if you've been returned a token, that token can just be kept around for as long as you want, for example. So once we've received a user's payment details, or once many services that offer remote tokenization have received a user's payment details, and they've returned you that token, you can keep that kicking around for as long as you need it. So if we talk about Uber as an example, you put your payment card details in Uber once, and you never see that card again, right? You've put it in the app, you've paid, well, it has your details, you get in the cab, you get out the cab. You never have to look at your payment details and authorize a payment. It's all just happening in the background because they're doing something called vaulting. They're storing that details and recalling it later. They're going back to Uber and saying, they're going back to Braintree and saying, hey, I've got this customer, can you give us their token? And we're saying, yeah, sure, Uber, here's your token, make that payment. Which is absolutely magic. And you've seen this before. I'm sure all of you have seen one-click checkouts, Humble Bundle, Amazon, even Apple have one-click checkouts. And when we see these one-click checkouts, that's essentially the same mechanic. What they're saying there is, hey, merchant online, you don't need to take that user's payment details. Just tell us who the user is, and we'll provide you a one-use token that you can use, so you don't have to handle any of the messy stuff, so that the user doesn't have to trust you with their payment details. We've got that covered. So tokenization is total magic at this point. It takes away all the messiness. It lets us do some really neat things. It lets us remove huge steps in our UI and our UX, which is a huge boon for users. If you can take out whole steps from the UI experience, you're improving UX for your users. So let's talk about payment methods. So when we talk about that token, we talk about a payment method nonce. Nonce meaning a one-use word. And this is actually a payment method nonce in the background here. Again, massive string of meaningless garbage. But the neat thing about that payment method nonce is that doesn't necessarily have to look like anything, right? Like, it could be a PayPal, but then this could also be an Android Pay, but then it could also be a Bitcoin or credit card. Because the neat thing about these tokens, these long strings of data, is that they have what's called genericity. And this isn't a word I've made up, this is just how functional programmers talk. And the cool thing about genericity is that that token can look like any payment method we want. If we talk about using this in production, if we talk about that pain for developers I mentioned earlier, you don't have to worry about what your user wants to pay with. If the customer comes to you and they give you a credit card, they give you a Bitcoin, they give you a PayPal, you don't have to deal with all that mess in the back end, because fundamentally all you're getting is that one token, and that one token can represent any of those. So when you interact with a payments API, that's all you need to give. You don't need to say, oh, well, is it a credit card, do this? Is it PayPal, do this? You just got the payment token and you just do transactions against that. Because tokenization is total magic. So this is all great, this makes us really happy. We've solved the problems for the merchants, they can take whatever method they want. We've solved it for the customers, they can pay whatever method they want, and we removed UI steps. But the most awesome bit is because those tokens are generic, when it comes to new payment methods in the future, we have no new code. So if we talk about what's coming up in the future, we see rumors of Samsung Pay, we hear rumors of almost a new payment method coming out every week. I'm at a launch for a new type of online wallet on Wednesday, and it's like, this is an everyday occurrence in London. And when those happen, we don't have to add new code. If we look at an example of Payments API, as I just mentioned, we just see that our payment method nonce is all we put in there. This is all it takes to do a transaction sale in this. There is no having to deal with those special cases. So when that new payment method comes out next month, all you have to do is wait for your tokenization provider, for your Payments API provider to add that payment method, and you're automatically covered. Tokenization not only provides fantastic UX for your customers, it provides fantastic UX for your developers. That's because tokenization is total magic. Thank you very much, everyone. I've been Joe Nash. Please come talk to me throughout the conference.